Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm finally sharing some of my thriller recommendations with you. I read more thrillers, I think, than anything else, although I have been getting more into like new adult romance now. But thrillers have always just been what I like to read because I don't know, there's just something about starting a book and having to finish it in order to figure out what's happening. So I'm actually gonna go back a couple years because I started reading again a couple years ago, and that's when I started reading a lot more. And so I'm gonna go back and just tell you about my favorite thrillers throughout the last couple years. I'll probably try and make another thriller recommendation video at least once a year, maybe twice a year. We'll have to see how many thrillers I can get in there. But if you don't know, I also do Thriller Thursdays where I kind of review my most recent thrillers that I've been reading. And so I have a playlist. I will link it up above. I haven't done one in a while. I'm kind of behind, but you can check out, I think I have 2 or 3 that I already have done, but I am planning on continuing that series in the future. So every other Thursday or so, there should be a Thriller Thursday video once I get back on track. But this is just my thriller recommendations where it's my most favorite thrillers that I've read in the last couple years. So one of the first thriller books that I read a couple years ago was The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. I still think this is the only Ruth Ware book that I've read, which is so crazy to think. But I ended up giving it 5 stars a couple years ago. I don't know if I would give it the same now, but I still think that I'd probably give it around 4 or 5 stars if I read it again. This book I really liked because it dealt with questioning whether or not it was an unreliable narrator. And so I think this one girl was on a cruise ship and some weird things started happening and you didn't know if she was crazy or what was going on because she was drinking and taking medication and then was accusing people of breaking into her cabin and stuff like that. It was actually really good. Now that I'm thinking back on it, I think I probably would give it 5 stars again because I remember being really shocked at the ending. But unfortunately, this was before I started doing Goodreads reviews, so I don't remember exactly how I felt about it, but I did rate it 5 stars, and so I think that you might like it. Another book that I really loved was The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. Again, this is the only book that I've read so far of Paula Hawkins. I gave this 5 stars a couple years ago, and I remember literally loving this book. I think I watched the movie right after I read the book, and I thought the movie was way worse because you really didn't know what the people were thinking in their minds. It wasn't really a dialogue movie. I just really remember liking this book. Again, it was right when I was getting back into thrillers and reading and stuff, so I'm not sure how I would rate it now, but I still think I would rate it pretty high because I liked the writing style. It was easy for me to read, and I just remember being shocked at this book. Now, one of my most favorite thrillers ever is Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. I gave this 5 stars, and I feel if I read it now, I would definitely give it 5 stars again. I loved this book so much, and I remember sitting and reading it all in one evening because I just needed to know what was going to happen. It's about this lady who marries this guy who turns out, I guess, to be controlling her and stuff. And so to me, it was a survival story because it was so weird. They would go out with other friends and the other friends just thought that this lady was making up excuses about why she couldn't go to see anybody, but it's because he actually locked her up in the room and stuff. And oh my gosh, my anxiety was so crazy, but it's definitely been one of my favorites. And so if you take anything away from this video, definitely read this book. Now, my next book that I'm going to recommend is Big Little Lies by Leanne Moriarty. I really enjoyed this book, even though it's a pretty big book. I read it when I was at the beach a couple years ago, and I loved how in-depth her characters were written. And I'm usually not a character person, but I loved the stories of their lives, and even the thriller part was pretty awesome. I recently was watching the TV show, and I just don't feel the TV show is as good as the book. I don't know. It was a couple years ago that I actually read it, so if you've already seen the show, you probably would like the book better. I will say I have read a couple other of Leanne's books, and they just were not as good as Big Little Lies. So if you want to read one of her books, I highly suggest Big Little Lies, and then not probably any of her other books, but I don't know. I just love Big Little Lies so much. Another B.A. Paris book I want to recommend is The Breakdown. This one wasn't as good as Behind Closed Doors in my opinion, but it was still really creepy. And again, I just love having like an unreliable narrator, because the narrator of this book, like, she thought that she kept like seeing things. She again was like doing medicine, like taking medicine and drinking and stuff like that, and then like all these weird things were happening and she thought people were breaking into the house. I don't know why, I feel like all the books that I read I'm like saying the same thing because that's kind of what the story is, but I just ended up really liking it. I think there were a couple slow parts, and so I did only rate it 4 stars, but it actually, like, thinking back on it, I was super, like, I didn't know what was going on, and I really, really like that about a thriller, so I think it's still a great book. The next book I'm going to recommend is Final Girls by Riley Sager. I am a huge fan of Riley Sager, and Final Girls was the first book that I read by him. I rated it 5 stars, and back when I actually read this book, I think I had just started writing Goodreads reviews, which is so funny because I said, "This was a fantastic book. Highly recommend if you love thrillers." That tells me a lot past Jackie. Thanks a lot. Like, what? This one was about a college student that had gone to a cabin with her friends, and there was like a huge massacre, and she was the only person that made it out alive. And it talks about her life like being scarred from this, and then how she thinks that the killer came back to actually kill her. Like, I can't even imagine like what it would be like to live through a massacre and then like have to live your life again. So that was really interesting, and I did really, really like this book. Next book I'm gonna recommend is Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. This was a pretty hefty book, but it was a really good one. Now, I will warn you that this one is a lot more graphic than the other books that I've talked about, and so if you're like woozy about like rape or just weird like things that people do for torture, like don't read it because it gets up there. But because I'm a psycho and I like reading books about psychos, it was right up my alley. This one also, like, the ending was pretty epic, so you definitely have to read it. I don't really have anything to say about the synopsis because I don't want to give anything away, but if you like dark psychological thrillers that will like make you like, I don't know, give you chills in the night, then you should definitely read this one. Another 5-star read was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Now, this is like a sci-fi thriller. It deals with alternate realities, and oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite books of all time. Like, I love this book so much. I just recently read his book Recursion, and let me just tell you, Dark Matter is like the best ever. Like, I love it. My mind was blown, and it's still blown. Like, I wish he would write a sequel because that cliffhanger ending, oh my gosh, like, so crazy. So if you like alternate reality, like time travel type of things, then you should definitely read that book. It's amazing. The next book I'm gonna recommend is Where They Found Her by Kimberly McCreet. This book dealt with a dead baby that they found, and they were trying to find out like where it came from. There was definitely a twist I didn't see coming, and it kind of broke my heart just like actually reading about the characters, and so that's one of the reasons why I loved it so much. It's not a super fast-paced thriller, but I just felt like it was written so well. Another one of my all-time favorites is Close My Eyes by Sophie Mackenzie. I feel like this book is very underrated, and it was amazing. Like, I think it's definitely up there with like my all-time thrillers, and I felt like it was so cleverly written. Like, again, it deals with a mother dealing with a loss of a child. I don't know if it's because I suffer from infertility myself or what, but like, I'm so drawn to thrillers that like play on the emotions of women that are dealing with like a loss of a child or something like that. The other reason that I really like this book is because the ending wasn't rushed. I hate in thrillers when endings are rushed, and this book had so many twists and turns. Like, I did not know who was doing what, and it was so crazy. Like, I remember I could not wait to finish it, and then I even wrote in my review that it explained exactly like why what happened, how it happened, and I really like that because I hate when it's just like, it's the end, it's rushed, they just tell you really quick and then it's like done and over with. I really highly recommend this one. It's a really good psychological thriller. Another recommendation from Riley Sager is The Last Time I Lied. I gave this 5 stars. It definitely wasn't my favorite setting because it's in camp and like I was homeschooled and I never went to camp, but a lot of people found it like super creepy that way. It's about this character Emma who had a couple different friends and they were in this cabin when they were younger and the friends ended up disappearing. No one knows what happened to them. And then later on in her adulthood, the camp reopens again and asks her to come back and like help teach art. I think she's an artist. And she decides whether or not that's good or not because there's a lot of like, you know, obviously history at that camp. So she ends up coming back and again, people went missing. It was actually a really good book. I enjoyed the ending. I felt that the ending like was a good way to end this book because there's just, I don't know, sometimes thriller endings aren't just what I wanted. So 5 stars for me. Another thriller I'm recommending is Byrd Box by Josh Malerman. Now this is kind of like thriller / horror, but oh my gosh, this book is so good. It is so good, and even the Netflix movie is really good, but I definitely think you should read the book first. This is like an apocalyptic world where people have to like keep their eyes closed if they go outside because there's this thing that they like see or something happens where like if they open their eyes then they will literally like go crazy and commit suicide. And so it's about these survivors that are living in this house, like they have everything like closed off, boarded up. If they have to go outside for anything, they have to wear blindfolds. Oh my gosh, story is absolutely crazy. You just need to read it. Now on to another favorite author. Alice Feeney wrote Sometimes I Lie, and I loved this book. Read it in an afternoon. Literally, there's so many twists and turns. It was so good. Like, I was shocked at the ending. It's about this girl named Amber who was in a coma and wakes up in the hospital. She can't move or speak, but she can just hear, and she sometimes lies, it says. And she kind of goes through like in the story between like the past and the present day, and oh my gosh, it is just a shocker. Another one of my favorites is Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Kane, and this is part of a series. I loved this one and the second one. I have not read the third one yet. This is about a serial killer who won't leave his wife alone. Like, she was married to him, and the beginning scene is someone running into their house and there's a dead body hanging in the garage, and like she thought she was living just a regular marriage and didn't realize her husband was literally killing women in the garage. But people think that she was an accomplice. She takes her 2 kids and tries to run away from all these people that are like mad at her. Her husband Melvin has been following her around trying to like take the kids away or kill her or something. But anyway, this book gave me like so much anxiety, and it is just one of the craziest thrillers that I've read, where I just was like reading about her and I was like, oh my gosh, like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Like, you know how you do in like a horror movie? That's kind of how I felt in this book. Another recommendation is The Stillwater Girls by Minka Kent. This is about, it's kind of like The Village, where these girls were raised in this isolated cabin and they come to find out that everything they were told was a lie. I love the whole survival aspect of it, where it's like isolation, you just don't know, like they're living like they're from like, I don't know, the 18th century or something like that. Loved it, rated it 5 stars. It's a quick read to me anyway. You should definitely read it. And last but not least on this list is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This one is about this college student who gets stuck in a snowstorm and has to pull off at a rest stop, and at this rest stop, like, her and I think it's like 4 or 5 other people get snowed in, and she realizes that there's a kidnapped child in the back of a van, so she's snowed in with a child kidnapper. And I was shocked at how this all played out. There were a bunch of twists and turns again. It was a really good thriller in my opinion, so highly recommend, and you should definitely read it like in the winter time when it's snowing outside so you get the full effect. That's it for my thriller recommendations video. These are all the thrillers that I've read over the last couple years up until present day that I think are good enough for me to recommend to you. If you've read any of these, like, let me know down in the comments like what you thought about them. Even if you just liked them, I'm fine with that. And if you have any thrillers that you want to recommend to me that you think that I would like based off of this list, definitely definitely let me know down in the comments. Again, give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it.